Welcome back, everyone. Today we're strapping in for a deep dive into the world of tailwheel airplanes. Specifically, we'll be looking at their, well, unique ground operations, takeoffs, and landings. And our trusty guide for this journey is the FAA's Airplane Flying Handbook.
Always a good place to start, right?
Absolutely. Now, I've got to say, these planes, they have a bit of a reputation, don't they, for being a bit, well, quirky, especially when you're still on the ground.
That's putting it mildly. They definitely demand a different approach compared to your typical nose-wheel aircraft. Think of it this way. You're taxiing along, and suddenly the plane wants to lift off before you've even reached the runway.
Oh, so it's like a bucking bronco, but in the air.
In a sense, yeah. Or try landing in a crosswind, and the plane acts like a weather vane trying to turn into the wind with a mind of its own.
That sounds like a handful.
It can be, but that's all part of the appeal for many tailwheel enthusiasts. Now, to really grasp these quirks, we need to understand the fundamental difference in their design. Unlike aircraft with tricycle landing gear, where the nose wheel is in front, tailwheel planes have their center of gravity located behind the main wheels.
So it's like trying to balance a broomstick upright on your palm, constantly adjusting to keep it from tipping over.
Exactly. That rearward center of gravity is what makes them inherently unstable on the ground. Any gust of wind, any change in direction, and the plane wants to swerve.
Ah, so that explains the weathervaning we were talking about.
Exactly. It's a constant battle to keep the nose pointed where you want it. The wind wants to push the tail around, turning the plane into the wind like a shopping cart in a strong wind. You know how that goes.
I can definitely picture that. So what's the trick to managing this weathervaning while taxiing?
Well, it requires constant correction with the ailerons, those flaps on the wings, and even the elevator, the control surface on the tail. You have to use a combination of inputs depending on the wind direction and strength. It's almost like a feeling, a dance between you and the plane.
It sounds like it takes a lot of finesse.
It does. The Airplane Flying Handbook actually recommends experimenting with different elevator positions while taxiing to find what works best for different wind conditions. It's all about finding that sweet spot to maintain control.
So it's not as simple as just steering with your feet, like in a car.
Not at all. You're using a whole symphony of controls to keep things in check. And to add another layer of fun, some tailwheel aircraft have such limited forward visibility that pilots have to do S-turns or even zigzag just to make sure there's nothing in their path.
So you can't even see where you're going. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Well, it definitely adds to the challenge, and it highlights the importance of developing a heightened sense of awareness when operating these aircraft. You're not just driving, you're maneuvering a machine that demands your constant attention.
So we've talked about the challenges of just staying on the ground with these tailwheel planes.
Mm.
But what happens when you actually want to take off? Does it get easier once you're in the air?
Oh, this is where things get really interesting. You see, unlike nose-wheel aircraft, tailwheel planes actually start flying before they even leave the ground.
Wait, hold on. How is that even possible?
It's all about the angle of attack. Because of the way tailwheel planes sit, their wings are already generating lift at a much lower speed than a nose-wheel aircraft. So they're eager to get airborne, almost like they're, well, itching to fly.
So they're like those puppies that are just bouncing with energy, ready to leap into action.
Exactly. They're full of potential energy. Now, during the takeoff roll, the pilot actually raises the tail to improve visibility. But this also creates a yawing motion, a tendency for the nose to swing to the side, which needs to be countered with the rudder. It's a constant balancing act.
It sounds like a lot to manage, especially at those critical low speeds.
It is. You're coordinating the rudder and elevator to keep the plane balanced and on track, all while managing engine power and monitoring your airspeed. It's a delicate dance of control inputs, all happening in a matter of seconds.
So even just getting off the ground is a mini adventure in a tailwheel plane.
Absolutely. And once you're up in the air, the challenge shifts to landing. And there are two main techniques for touching down a tailwheel aircraft.
Two different techniques. Okay, let's hear about those. This is where I imagine things could get really tricky.
You're not wrong. Landing a tailwheel plane requires a whole different mindset and skill set compared to a nose-wheel aircraft. It's all about precision, finesse, and understanding how those rearward forces impact the plane's behavior.
So walk me through it. What's the main difference in approach?
Well, first and foremost, you have to be incredibly precise with your alignment and minimize any drift during touchdown. Any misalignment, any sideways movement can put a lot of stress on that delicate tailwheel landing gear.
Oh, I see. So one wrong move and you could be looking at some serious damage.
That's the risk, yes. Now, Those two landing techniques I mentioned, they're called the three-point landing and the wheel landing. The Airplane Flying Handbook actually has a really good visual comparison of the two in Figure 14-2. You should check it out.
Okay, so remind me again, what are those two techniques?
A three-point landing, as the name suggests, involves touching down with the main wheels and the tail wheel all at the same time. It requires a steeper fuselage angle than you'd use with a nose wheel plane.
Steeper. Why is that?
It all comes back to that rearward center of gravity we talked about earlier. The steeper angle helps to ensure that all three wheels touch down simultaneously, distributing the weight evenly and preventing the tail wheel from hitting the ground too hard. Now, the handbook even mentions that if you don't execute a three-point landing correctly, there's a chance of something called skips.
Skips, like skipping stones on a lake.
That's the idea. If you pull back on the controls too early, the main wheels might touch down while the tail is still up in the air, and that can cause the plane to bounce back up momentarily before settling down. Not exactly the smoothest landing.
Definitely sounds like something you'd want to avoid. So what about this wheel landing you mentioned?
Ah, the wheel landing. In this technique, you touch down on the main wheels first, and then gently let the tail settle down. It's often preferred in crosswind conditions because it gives you, the pilot, more control authority to counter those gusts. You have a bit more leeway to make those last-minute adjustments.
Interesting. So it's like picking the right tool for the job, depending on the wind and other conditions.
Exactly. But here's something that always gets me with tailwheel landings. The handbook talks about applying full back pressure on the elevator once the tail wheel touches down. Now, why would you do that? Wouldn't that just make the plane bounce back up?
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, right?
Yes.
Especially if you're used to flying nose-wheel aircraft.
You would think so, but the handbook explains it really well. They even have a diagram in Figure 14-3 to illustrate the concept. Holding back pressure after the tail wheel touches down actually forces the tail down, which increases stability and helps to prevent those nasty oscillations and bounces. It's like using the elevator to pin the tail wheel to the ground.
So you're essentially using the elevator to keep the tail from bouncing around. Makes sense.
Precisely. It ensures a nice, smooth, and controlled landing. Now, are you ready for the grand finale? Crosswind landings.
Oh boy, here we go. This is what I've been waiting for. Crosswind landings. This is where things get, well, intense, right?
They can be, but it's also where the true skill of a tailwheel pilot shines through. In a crosswind, you can't just land straight on. You need to use a technique called side slip or wing low.
Okay, now you're just using fancy words to intimidate me. Break it down for me. What's this side slip all about?
Imagine this. You're approaching the runway, but that pesky wind is pushing you sideways. So to counteract that drift, you have to angle the plane into the wind. That way, you touch down on one wheel first, kind of like, well, like a crab scuttling sideways.
Okay, I can picture that. So you're basically fighting the wind's force that's trying to push you off course.
Exactly. You're meeting that sideways force head on. But the challenge doesn't end there. As you start to slow down during that after-landing roll, you actually need to increase the aileron input, those flaps on the wing, to prevent the wind from trying to lift that upwind wing.
I'm guessing that's because the wind has a stronger effect as you lose speed.
Exactly. The slower you go, the more susceptible you are to that weathervaning tendency. The handbook has a good illustration of this in Figure 14-5. It shows how the wind wants to push that tail around, especially as you're slowing down. And this, my friend, is where things can go really wrong if you're not careful. If that weathervaning gets out of control, you could find yourself in what we call a ground loop.
Ground loop. No, that doesn't sound good.
It's not. Picture this. The plane starts to turn uncontrollably on the ground. It's a rapid, unintended spin, and the forces can build up so much that you could even strike a wingtip on the ground. Not a pretty sight.
Oh, wow. That sounds terrifying.
It can be. And the Airplane Flying Handbook paints a pretty vivid picture of this scenario in Figure 14-4. It really highlights the importance of quick and decisive rudder and braking corrections to counter any swerves and prevent a full-blown ground loop. You need to stay ahead of the plane, always anticipating what it might do next.
So it sounds like you need nerves of steel and lightning-fast reflexes to handle a tailwheel plane in a crosswind.
That's one way to put it. But it's also incredibly rewarding when you master it. There's a certain satisfaction that comes from taming these, well, inherently unstable machines. It's a true test of your piloting skills.
I can imagine. So let's talk about some specific landing scenarios that can be tricky. What about those short field and soft field landings? I bet those present their own unique challenges, right?
Absolutely. Short field landings are all about maximizing your braking and minimizing that landing roll. You need to touch down precisely at the right speed and apply the brakes effectively to bring the plane to a stop within a limited distance. It's like threading a needle, except you're doing it with a plane.
It sounds like a carefully choreographed dance of precision and timing.
You could say that. Now, soft field landings, these are a bit different. They require a gentler touch where you want to minimize braking and let the soft surface help you slow down naturally. It's like a soft landing on a trampoline.
I'm guessing that means a smooth touchdown is key.
Absolutely, but here's a crucial point that the Airplane Flying Handbook emphasizes. In a soft field landing, you actually want to keep the tail wheel down throughout the entire roll.
Wait, why is that? Wouldn't that create more drag and make it harder to slow down?
You'd think so, but it's all about stability. Keeping that tail wheel down helps prevent the plane from nosing over, especially if you encounter any unexpected soft spots or bumps in the terrain. It's like having an extra set of wheels to help you stay balanced on a less forgiving surface.
So it's not just about steering in this case. It's about using the tail wheel to help maintain stability on that soft, unpredictable ground.
Precisely. It's all about adapting your technique to the specific situation and understanding how that tail wheel can be used to your advantage. It's about mastering the nuances of these aircraft and learning to work in harmony with their unique characteristics.
It sounds like there's a real art to tailwheel flying. It's not just about following a set of rules. It's about developing a feel for the plane and responding intuitively to its movements.
You hit the nail on the head. It's about becoming one with the machine, understanding its quirks, and using them to your advantage. It's about respecting its limitations while pushing the boundaries of what's possible. It's a truly rewarding experience when you get it right.
I could only imagine. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here, both literally and figuratively, when it comes to the basics of tailwheel aircraft operations. But there's so much more to explore.
Oh, absolutely. We've just scratched the surface.
Wow. I'm really starting to get a sense of, well, just how much technique goes into handling a tailwheel aircraft. It's like a constant conversation between you and the plane, always making those little adjustments and corrections. We've talked about their inherent instability, the challenges of, just taxiing around, taking off, and even those different landing techniques. But what about those times when things don't quite go as planned?
That's a really important point to bring up, because just like with any type of flying, things can go wrong. And when they do in a tailwheel airplane, well, it can get a bit more, shall we say, dramatic.
And I think one of those dramatic events that often comes up when we're talking about tailwheel aircraft is the dreaded ground loop.
Ah, yes, the ground loop, the stuff of legends or nightmares, depending on who you ask.
I've heard the term thrown around, but I'm not entirely sure what it entails. Is it as bad as it sounds? Like, paint me a picture. What happens during a ground loop?
All right, so picture this. You're taxiing, taking off, or even landing, and all of a sudden, the plane starts to swerve uncontrollably. It's like a force takes over, and the plane enters this rapid, unintended turn right there on the ground. That's a ground loop. And because of that rearward center of gravity we talked about, the forces involved can get pretty intense.
So what causes that loss of directional control in the first place? Is it always wind related, or can other things contribute to it?
Wind is a big one, especially those pesky crosswinds. But ground loops can also happen because of, incorrect rudder or brake application. Even things like uneven weight distribution in the plane or the condition of the runway surface can play a role. It's like a chain reaction where one small mistake can cascade into a bigger issue.
So it's a whole bunch of factors coming together, and it sounds like pilot technique is key to preventing these ground loops from happening in the first place. And I know the Airplane Flying Handbook actually dedicates a whole section to this with some pretty detailed illustrations. Like figure 14-4 shows the forces at play during a ground loop and what can happen if things go really wrong.
Right, exactly. The handbook really hammers home the importance of anticipating and reacting quickly to any sign of a swerve. It's all about staying ahead of the plane, using smooth rudder and brake inputs to maintain directional control throughout the ground operation. You're constantly thinking ahead, planning your next move.
So it's a high pressure situation demanding that quick thinking, those precise control inputs. You can't just react. You have to anticipate what's coming next.
Absolutely. But the good news is that with practice and a good understanding of how these planes behave, Ground loops can be avoided.
Huh.
Experienced tailwheel pilots develop this almost sixth sense and intuition for what the plane's going to do next, and they can make those subtle corrections before things get out of hand.
That's reassuring. So it's not all doom and gloom. It sounds like there's a strong emphasis on really understanding the aircraft and its tendencies when it comes to tailwheel flying.
There is. You have to respect the machine, recognize that it requires a different approach, a different mindset compared to those nose-wheel airplanes we're all used to. It's a partnership, a dance between pilot and plane.
Well, we've explored some of the challenges, the potential pitfalls, the things that can go wrong. But let's not forget about the good stuff. What is it about tailwheel aircraft that makes them so appealing to pilots, even in this day and age, with all our modern technology and fancy gadgets?
That's a great question, and I think it boils down to the unique flying experience they offer. Tailwheel aircraft, they demand a higher level of skill, a greater degree of precision, and that brings with it a sense of accomplishment, a satisfaction that's, well, it's hard to find elsewhere. It's like mastering a difficult instrument or a challenging art form. It's that connection between pilot and machine that's just so exhilarating.
So it's not just about getting from point A to point B. It's about the journey, the experience of flying itself.
Exactly. There's a rawness and intimacy to tailwheel flying that's been lost in many of those, modern aircraft with all their computerized systems and automated controls. It's about feeling every nuance of the plane's response, anticipating its movements, and making those subtle adjustments to maintain control. It's about pushing your piloting skills to the limit and coming out on top with a grin on your face and a story to tell.
You've painted quite a picture there. And I can see why pilots are drawn to this type of flying. But it's not just about the challenges. That there's also a historical aspect to tailwheel aircraft, a connection to, the early days of aviation, the pioneers who paved the way.
Absolutely. When you fly a tailwheel airplane, you're flying a piece of history. These planes, they represent that spirit of innovation, of adventure that defined those early days of aviation. They're a symbol of the ingenuity, the determination of those who dared to take to the skies in machines that were, well, let's just say they weren't exactly known for their ease of handling.
It's humbling to think about those early aviators.
Mhm.
They didn't have GPS, autopilot, or any of the fancy gadgets we take for granted today. They were out there facing the unknown with just their skill and their wits to guide them.
It's truly remarkable, isn't it? They relied on instinct, a deep understanding of the wind and the weather, and a feel for their aircraft that was almost, well, almost supernatural. And when you fly a tailwheel airplane today, you're tapping into that legacy, connecting with a lineage of aviators who really pushed the boundaries of what was possible.
It's like stepping back in time, experiencing the essence of flight in its purest form. No distractions, no crutches, just you, the plane, and the open sky.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so special. It's a reminder of where we came from, a tribute to those pioneers who dared to dream of flight, and in doing so, made it a reality for all of us.
So we've talked about the technical stuff, the history, the thrill of it all. But I'm curious to know, beyond all that, what do you think flying a tailwheel plane teaches a pilot about themselves?
Oh, that's a good question. A thought-provoking one. I think it teaches you humility, first and foremost. You learn to respect the power of nature, the importance of precision, and the need to be constantly vigilant, always on your toes. It teaches you adaptability, to think on your feet, and to react quickly and calmly when things don't go as planned.
So it's not just about learning to fly a plane. It's about learning about yourself, about your own limits and capabilities.
Absolutely. Tailwheel flying pushes you, tests you, both mentally and physically. It demands focus, discipline, and a willingness to learn from your mistakes. And in that process, you discover things about yourself, strengths, weaknesses, things you might not have known were there before.
It's like a mirror reflecting back not just your piloting abilities, but your character, your resilience.
Well said. And I think that's what makes it such a transformative experience. It's about more than just mastering a machine. It's about mastering yourself.
That's a powerful insight. And it leads perfectly into what I wanted to touch on next, the mental game of tailwheel flying. We've talked about the physical demands, the need for precise control inputs, but what about the mental side of things? What kind of mindset does it take to successfully pilot a tailwheel aircraft?
That's a crucial aspect that often gets overlooked. Tailwheel flying requires a heightened level of situational awareness, a constant anticipation of what the plane might do next, and the mental flexibility to adjust your approach as conditions change. It's a mental workout just as much as it is a physical one.
So you're not just reacting to what's happening. You're thinking ahead, planning for different scenarios, almost like a chess game.
Exactly. It's like playing chess with the wind and the plane. You have to be able to process information quickly, make decisions on the fly, and stay calm under pressure. There's no room for hesitation or second-guessing yourself.
So you're developing a certain mental toughness, a resilience that allows you to stay focused even when things get, well, a little bit hairy.
Exactly. You have to embrace the challenge, accept that you're going to make mistakes, and be willing to learn from them. It's a continuous process of improvement, always striving to do better.
So it's a journey, not just a destination, a constant learning process that keeps you engaged, challenged, and growing as a pilot.
That's a great way to put it. It's about the journey, the pursuit of mastery, always striving for excellence, both in the air and, well, in life itself.
That's beautifully said. We've talked about the technical stuff, the history, the mental aspects, the challenges, the thrills. But I think there's one more element we need to address, and that's the emotional connection that pilots often develop with these tailwheel aircraft. What is it about them that evokes such strong feelings, such passionate responses?
That's an interesting point, and I think it speaks to the unique nature of this type of flying. Tailwheel aircraft, more than any other type of plane, demand a partnership between pilot and machine. There's a level of trust, of respect, of, well, almost a symbiotic relationship that develops.
It's like a dance, right? This constant exchange of energy, of communication between the pilot and the plane.
Precisely. And when you successfully execute that challenging maneuver, or you grease that landing in a tricky crosswind, or just, enjoy the feeling of the wind in your hair as you fly low and slow, it creates a powerful emotional response. It's a mix of exhilaration, of accomplishment, and just a deep appreciation for the beauty and simplicity of flight.
It's almost like tapping into something primal, a connection to that age-old human desire to fly, to experience the world from a different perspective, to push the boundaries of what's possible.
Well said. It's about reconnecting with that innate human desire to fly, to break free from the constraints of the ground, and
Yeah.
to explore the world from a different perspective. And tailwheel aircraft, with their unique challenges and rewards, they provide a powerful platform for that kind of exploration.
They do. They remind us that flying is not just about technology and automation. It's about skill. It's about passion. It's about that deep connection to the art of flight.
Precisely. And as we continue to explore the vast and ever-evolving world of aviation, it's important to remember and to honor those who came before us, those who paved the way for the advancements we enjoy today.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive into the fascinating world of tailwheel aircraft. We've covered a lot of ground, both literally and figuratively, but there's always more to learn, always more to explore.
There is, and we encourage our listeners to continue their own exploration of this captivating corner of the aviation world.
It's amazing, isn't it? We've really journeyed through the heart and soul of tailwheel aviation, from the technical nuts and bolts to that, well, almost poetic connection pilots have with these machines. But before we taxi off into the sunset, let's try to distill some key takeaways for our listener. What really stands out to you as the most important things to remember about these aircraft?
I think the biggest takeaway, the one that really sets tailwheel aircraft apart, is their inherent instability. It's not a bad thing. It's just, well, it's in their DNA. And because of that, everything you do as a pilot, from taxiing to landing, requires a different level of precision, of awareness compared to those nose wheel planes we're all used to.
It's almost like you're constantly anticipating the plane's next move, ready to respond with just the right touch at just the right moment.
Exactly. And that constant interaction, that back and forth between pilot and plane, that's what makes tailwheel flying so engaging, so rewarding. You're not just along for the ride. You're an active participant in the dance of flight.
Speaking of dancing, we talked about crosswind landings
Yeah.
and how they can be, well, quite a handful. It sounds like mastering those is a real badge of honor for tailwheel pilots.
It is. Learning to side slip, to touch down on one wheel, to manage that weathervaning tendency as you slow down. It's a symphony of coordinated control inputs. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of finesse. It's not something you pick up overnight.
And those ground loops we talked about, yikes. They really highlight the importance of, well, staying vigilant throughout the entire ground operation. One little slip up and things can go south pretty quickly.
Absolutely. A slight miscalculation with the rudder or brakes, a gust of wind at the wrong moment and suddenly you're fighting to maintain control. It's a reminder that tailwheel flying demands respect. You have to stay focused, you have to be aware of your surroundings, and maybe have a little bit of luck on your side too.
But even with all those challenges, it's clear that there's a real passion for tailwheel aircraft.
Hmm.
Pilots talk about them with a certain reverence, almost like they have a personality of their own.
They do, and I think that passion stems from that unique connection pilots forge with these machines. Tailwheel aircraft, they demand a deeper level of involvement, a more hands-on approach to flying that brings with it a sense of accomplishment, a satisfaction that you don't always find in more modern aircraft.
It's like stepping back in time, connecting with the spirit of those early aviators who took to the skies in machines that were, well, by today's standards, incredibly challenging to fly.
Exactly. They relied on their skill, their instinct, their understanding of their aircraft to overcome those challenges. And that legacy, that spirit of adventure, of mastery, it continues to draw pilots to tailwheel aircraft even today. It's a timeless pursuit.
So for our listener who may have never flown a tailwheel plane or maybe never even seen one up close, what would you say is the most important thing they should take away from this deep dive? What's the one thing you'd want them to remember?
That's a good question. I think it's the appreciation for the skill, the artistry involved in piloting these unique aircraft. The next time you see a tailwheel plane take off or land, take a moment to really appreciate that delicate dance of control inputs, the anticipation of the plane's movements, the constant adjustments needed to maintain balance and direction. It's a beautiful blend of science and art, a testament to human ingenuity and a reminder of the enduring allure of flight.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I think we've successfully navigated this deep dive into the world of tailwheel aircraft. It's been a fascinating journey filled with insightful discoveries and a renewed appreciation for this captivating corner of aviation.
It has, and we hope our listener has enjoyed the ride as much as we have.
So until next time, keep your wings level and your curiosity high. And if you ever get the chance to see a tailwheel plane in person, take a moment to marvel at the skill and artistry it takes to fly these incredible machines. They're a true testament to the spirit of aviation.
Happy landings, everyone.